So today we're diving into something pretty intense. It's a raw, first-person account from inside a high-security penal psychiatry unit. The author, who we'll just be calling the buyer, refers to this place as Blacksite, Berlin. And this is his story, written from the inside in his own words.
Now, this is the quote that kicks the whole thing off. It's not subtle, right? It's just this incredibly desperate declaration that tells you everything you need to know about the psychological pressure he was under. This feeling, this profound sense of being trapped, that's the trigger for everything that's about to happen.
So he reaches this breaking point on what he calls Station 10B. And you might think someone would just snap, lash out, but he doesn't. Instead, he comes up with this high-stakes, meticulously calculated plan. This wasn't about some spontaneous act of violence. It was about playing the system to force them to move him.
Okay, so what was the specific trigger that pushed him from just desperation into taking action? Well, after a full decade in confinement, a court order comes down extending his stay, indefinitely. And in his account, that was it. That was the moment the very last door slammed shut. Any hope of getting out through legal means was just gone. He had to find another way.
So here's the crazy part. His plan to go on a rampage? It was all an elaborate bluff. He makes up this whole violent scheme and then confides in the one person on the station he knows for a fact will rat him out. He basically weaponized the facility's own security protocols against itself. He created a threat so believable that they'd have absolutely no choice but to get him off that station. It was a brilliant and unbelievably risky psychological chess move.
And it works. It works exactly like he predicted. The informant talks, the staff hits the panic button, and the police show up to haul him away in full hand and foot shackles. But here's the twist. His successful escape wasn't to freedom. It was a transfer deeper into the belly of the beast, into a permanent lockdown cell.
So his plan worked, but of course, it came with a heavy price. The immediate consequence was being thrown into one of the most severe environments in the entire facility, an isolation cell, and that's where he'd spend the next 3 weeks.
And the conditions he describes are just brutal. He's in thin clothes, in a freezing cell with a broken window that's stuck open, and winter is literally on its way. The TV on the wall? Oh, that's conveniently broken. And unlike a normal isolation cell, there's no observation window, just total sensory deprivation and physical misery.
But this part right here shows you how his mind is always working, always a few moves ahead. Even freezing and totally alone, he's still strategizing. The staff wants to hit him with a long-acting injection, something that would basically strip him of his mental agency for months. But he counters. He says, okay, I'll take medication, but only orally. Why? Because that preserves his ability to stop taking it later. He's trading short-term compliance for long-term control.
So after 3 weeks of just enduring the cold and sticking to his guns, the negotiation actually pays off. He gets transferred to Station 10C, which was his goal all along. But, as he would quickly find out, in his own words, he had just stepped from the frying pan into the fire. Now, on this new station, he's stripped of pretty much everything. No internet access, none of the usual tools you'd expect. But in that void, the buyer finds this totally unexpected purpose. He decides he has to document his experience. He's going to write a book from the inside. And get this, the way he does it is just remarkable. The only tool he has is a gaming console, an Xbox. He types out his entire manuscript, letter by painstaking letter, using a controller and some basic writing app. I mean, can you even imagine the sheer force of will that would take? It's just a powerful testament to how determined he was to get his story out. This quote really gets to the heart of his motivation. In an environment that's filled with forced medication and just psychological chaos, the simple, structured act of writing becomes his lifeline. It's not just a project, it's a survival tool. It gives him meaning and it keeps his mind sharp.
But this newfound purpose is immediately and relentlessly put to the test. Because on Station 10C, he finds himself living right next door to a man who becomes, well, as he puts it, his personal scourge. It becomes a daily psychological battle.
So, just how bad is this neighbor? Well, the consensus among the other patients really says it all. Their court-ordered psychiatric detention is already a life sentence. But having this guy as a neighbor, they say it's like an additional punishment stacked right on top of it.
At the core of their daily conflict is this just fundamental clash of worldviews.
The buyer, even with all he's been through, refuses to get bogged down in what he sees as pointless lawsuits. His neighbor, on the other hand, is a litigation fanatic. He is obsessed with suing everybody for everything, and he's constantly trying to convert the buyer to his way of thinking. It's just a daily war of attrition.
Now, being a keen observer, the buyer doesn't just endure this neighbor, he starts to analyze him. He meticulously documents the man's behavior, and he starts to identify this pattern of traits that he believes lines up perfectly with a clinical definition of psychopathy.
So these are the key traits the buyer starts to chronicle. You've got constant manipulation and pathological lying, this hugely inflated sense of self-worth, and a complete refusal to take responsibility for anything. But there are two characteristics in his account that are especially disturbing: a parasitic lifestyle and a profound lack of empathy.
And this is probably the most vivid example. The buyer details how his neighbor cultivates what he calls a house slave, a cognitively impaired patient who is manipulated into doing everything for him. He washes his dishes, he runs his errands, he even brings him his clinic-provided meals, which the neighbor eats on top of his own food. It is a truly chilling picture of exploitation.
But even amidst all this darkness, the buyer holds on to this very bleak sense of humor. This is the newspaper headline he imagines for his neighbor's eventual capture. And it just perfectly encapsulates the man's priorities as the buyer sees them. Food comes before everything else, even freedom.
And this timeline, based on the buyer's research, really gives you the context for his assessment. I mean, the neighbor's history is this horrifying catalog of extreme violence and predatory abuse. And then there's that final detail, which is almost comical if it weren't so tragic. He escapes to dodge new charges, only to get caught because he stopped at a McDonald's during a routine police check.
So, day in and day out, this is the buyer's reality. The neighbor starts arguments over things that were never said. He launches into these nonsensical, hours-long monologues. The way it's described, it's a relentless psychological assault that is just impossible to escape.
The buyer uses this classic proverb to pretty much sum up his entire inescapable situation. All he wants is to be left alone so he can write his book, so he can survive. But peace just isn't on the menu when you've got chaos and conflict living right through the wall.
And that really leaves us with this one big question. The buyer's account is a story of survival, for sure, but it's also this powerful act of observation. In a system that seems designed to break a person down, what does it take to find that mental fortitude, to fight back, not with your fists, but with documentation and an Xbox controller?